Kask. Talk more Sixers and NBA right now. Joining us on the Boardwalk Honda hotline, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers Insider. Give us some more insights as the Sixers head down the stretch of the season. Some interesting matchups ahead of them. And we bring up Mike now. Mike, how you doing today?
Josh, I'm doing pretty good, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, and talk about doing pretty good. The Sixers are doing pretty good. Winners of 10 in a row, 2 of them without Joel Embiid. And, this is interesting because earlier this season they were 3-8 without him, but that wasn't with Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova on the team. It seems to me that, everyone focuses on Ben Simmons and on Dario, but the beauty of this team is that they fortified that bench, and now without Embiid, it's a little bit less stress on the other guys that they can have Ersan and Marco step up and be these great supporting actors in some ways around the star that is Ben Simmons.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. They're a much deeper team than they were earlier on in the season, just by a couple small additions. Obviously, you mentioned Bellinelli and Ilyasova, and you throw Fultz into the mix now, who's becoming at least a contributor off the bench for the team at this point in time. And earlier in the season, the bench, as you alluded to, was an Achilles heel for the team. They would have leads established. A lot of times, the bench would come in, and those leads would get blown. It would lead some of those losses that they had kind of built up over time. So I think that, that the addition of those guys combined with just the experience of the team, this team is it's a much better team now than it was, not just because of the additions, but the players are more, they're more accustomed to playing with each other. Brett has his rotations much more kind of figured out and smoothed out than he did earlier on in the year. And I think all those factors are kind of just coming together. Obviously, at the right point in time, you want the team to start gelling and playing well. The schedule obviously has helped the team. They had to fight through a really tough schedule early on, which I think kind of helped them to develop some of that chemistry and cohesion that they've been building on. And now coming down the stretch, they kind of get to benefit from getting that tough stretch of the schedule, already out of the way. And now they have a stretch where they're playing mostly, lottery-bound teams.
You look at this team as a whole, and I'm not saying that, it's okay that they're without Joel Embiid, but I think it's beneficial for them to learn how to play without him because there's a possibility he may not be there for game one. That 2-week window, if you go from a literal 14-day from having surgery to the start of the playoffs, you're really on that borderline. So this stretch is beneficial for them to learn what they can and can't do without Embiid on the floor, so that if they have to play with him without him a game or two, or let's say he gets into foul trouble in a game, I think they're more enabled now to be successful without him for short stretches.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. And that's kind of been the silver lining, I guess you could say, out of this, this recent injury. Obviously, no one wants Joel hurt. And if he ends up missing extended time into the playoff series, that would obviously become an issue for the team. But if he is able to rebound rather quickly, get back out there for the bulk of the playoffs, then like you said, this stretch could actually wind up being something that's very beneficial for the team to kind of learn that they could, they can do it without Joel. But obviously, like you said, they struggled doing that earlier in the year. I think now they're starting to gain some of that confidence and see that they can do it. And like you said, that's a good thing to do because, if like Joel could get into foul trouble, there's certain games, obviously, where he's just going to be not used as much as others, where they're going to be, injuries could be hampering him. So it's certainly a good thing for the team to have the confidence and to know that other guys can step up in the absence of Joel. I mean, I think everyone knows that to get to where the team really wants to go or where their ceiling is, you need Joel in the lineup. But to be able to kind of, overcome some of these things without him and then get him back could be, a real surge and a big boost for this team.
When you look at Ersan Ilyasova, this is a guy who has second run with the team, but he's been successful on the floor without Embiid. I went back and ran the numbers. In 26 games without Embiid, he's averaging almost 15 points a game, 7.5 rebounds. What is it about Ersan Ilyasova that he fits so well into what Brett Brown wants to do on offense?
I think he just really fits the style of play that, Brett really kind of likes to emphasize. He's a guy that can, spread the floor from a big guy position, can draw the opposing 4 or 5 out to the perimeter. He can obviously knock down. he opens up the paint for Ben Simmons and just provides them with another option. The way, Brett has his team structured, you like to have a ball handler, a creator out there, and then just shooters, guys that are capable of knocking it down. You look out at the floor at any given time, there's 3 or 4 guys that are capable shooters. Ersan is obviously already familiar with the system from last year. He's comfortable with Brett. It just seemed like the perfect fit now that he's not asked to do, quite as much as he was last year when he was a starter for the Sixers team, averaging 18 a night and was kind of looked to, after Joel went down as one of the main factors for offensive output. That's just not the case this season. He's kind of able to come in, fit in, and with other better talented players around him than what he had last year, the defense has to stay honest on, Marco or Markel or whoever else he's out there with, so he can, has a little bit more freedom, I think, just to operate and find his own shot.
When you look at heading down the stretch of this season, obviously they play the Nets. A lot of people expect them to beat the Nets, especially when you're coming on a 10-game winning streak at home. They're better at home. But it's the next 2 games that fascinate me because you got to go to Detroit Wednesday, and then you got the Cavs on Friday. To me, those 2 games will tell us a lot about if they can jump to that 3 seed or if they're going to stay in that 4 or 5 range, because you're playing the Pistons, Andre Drummond, no Joel Embiid. The Cavs, they got LeBron, no Joel Embiid to guard the rim. So to me, those 2 games are going to say a lot about this team, where they're going to end up in the standings.
Yeah, definitely, Josh, and especially that Cavs game. Obviously, I think a lot of people will point to that as the game that could probably really determine which of the 2 teams will take the 3rd spot and which will take the 4th spot. Detroit also, because that's been become somewhat of a rivalry, and obviously Drummond, without Joel in there to stop him, should be able to probably have his way with Amir or Ersan or Rashawn, whoever is on him. So that will be tough. The Sixers will have the chance to technically overtake the Cavs tonight. The Cavs have to play the Raptors. Sixers, obviously, like you said, have the Nets. Sixers win and a Cavs loss would push the Sixers a half game up above Cleveland for that 3 spot. And, at that point, they would be in control, basically, of the spot. It would be up to them. And, if they won out, the 3rd spot would be theirs. But that is a good point, those stretch of those upcoming games. I think that, if they're able to split those, specifically, obviously, the one against Cleveland, I think there's a really good chance that they could end up with that, the 3rd spot, especially considering Cleveland has a pretty difficult schedule coming up. They have Toronto, Washington, and then the Sixers. Compared to what we have, I think, especially based on that schedule, there's a good chance that the Sixers could, hold on to that 3 seed.
It's also interesting because you think about that last game of the year. It's against the Bucks. It's on a Wednesday. We know the playoffs start a few days later. We know Brett Brown comes from that Greg Popovich camp. And we know Pop loves to rest his guys at the end of the year. I'm looking at that Bucks game as maybe the Sixers say, you know what? We are where we are in the playoffs. Let's rest Ben. Let's rest Ilyasova. Let's rest some of these guys so when the playoffs start this weekend, they're fresh. Do you think that's a possibility that Brett looks at that last game and says, this is my opportunity to give my main guys a rest?
Yeah, Josh, I definitely think that's a possibility, especially, if they're already kind of locked into a seed. If it somehow came down to that Wednesday game to be the difference between the 4 and the 5 seed or, potentially the 3 and the 4 seed, that's obviously a factor that I think Brett would consider. But, I do think that he would definitely consider, like you said, kind of borrowing from his former mentor in Popovich and sitting some of those guys. I think we're starting to see a little bit more over these past few games. Obviously he's not sitting the guys, but I think he's been more willing to ride with the bench a little bit, especially once they kind of build up these leads. I think he obviously wants to get these guys a little bit more experience. Markel, Justin Anderson, obviously, some of these guys that are going to be relied upon to provide some bench minutes. I think it would be, not only something he would do, but it would probably be wise to, maybe rest. Ben Simmons, obviously, as a rookie, is a guy that's only missed, I think 1 game so far this whole season. For a minor injury, he's been extremely durable, but at the same time, he's not used to playing the schedule. And if he has, 4, 8, 12 more games to play in the postseason, it certainly wouldn't be a negative to get him a game or 2 of rest in the regular season. Same with Dario, although he's been, he's missing a couple of games now. I think this is a precautionary thing. If this was a playoff game, I'm pretty sure that Dario would be okay to be out there. But call this the Steve Kerr Warriors move here. He has an injury, let him get some added rest out of it. But definitely, I think that over these last couple of games, depending on seeding, obviously being the big factor, I think we could definitely see either the guys flat out sat out, or at least some of these reserve guys getting a lot more tick than they normally would.
We're talking with Michael Kaskey-Blomain, joining us. All guests appear on the Boardwalk Honda hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. And follow Michael on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB. That's at @TheRealMikeKB on Twitter. Sticking with Brett Brown, I think in some ways this has been Brett Brown's season to really show what he can and can't do. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to be the coach for the next 10 years. I'm also not going to say that he should be fired or any of that garbage. But I do feel like Brett has really been coming into his own. And as this team has evolved and developed this season, I think Brett has evolved and developed because of the fact that you see that some of the things that people criticized him for earlier in the season, the team has gotten more and more away from. And as the team has really gelled, it seems like Brett has really come into his own on the court. We know Brett has taken a million bullets for this organization off the court. So we know that with the media, he is what he is. He's become a very good handler of the media. But on the court, I think he has really evolved into a better coach, not just because he's had better players, but because I think he's had time to actually learn this team more, because there's a lot less injuries this year than in the past.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I mean, Brett Brown is a bigger part of the process as anyone. It was he was a first-time head coach when he came to Philly. He had, he was certainly not blameless in terms of the team's play and struggles over the first few years. I mean, obviously he was dealing with what he was dealing with, but I think it's just a matter of kind of just like the team itself. He, like you said, he's really kind of coming into his own. He's becoming comfortable. He finally has not only the talent on the roster, but a little bit of familiarity, and it's not quite as much of a revolving door, and also the injury issues. Like you said, he's finally been able to, have a roster that's kind of been set for him, and he doesn't have to worry about changing the rotation around every 2 games to deal with, guys on 10-day contracts or guys that are injured or guys that are missing time. He's had, barring obviously Joel's couple injuries, the later one here, a few games earlier in the season, he's had virtually the same starting lineup all year, the same bench, since they added Ersan and Marco, he got the bench in. And so much of what the Sixers are that I think is one thing, especially the critics might not understand, the Sixers culture, the way they play, the way they seem to be, like a legitimately good team where they really care about each other and the team's success. That's not a facade. That's the direct result of Brett Brown. It had to be exceedingly hard to stay as positive and as focused as he was for, the past 4 years. And as someone that has been to, dozens and dozens of the games of the Sixers games since Brett was the coach, he never once, seemed to be down on the luck. Even the years the team went 10-72, he did, he found positives out of each game. He did his best to develop the players. He stayed extremely excited about the future and the guys that they were working on, like Joel, Ben. And all of that combined with the style of play that he emphasizes, which is, very high ball movement, high pace, and defensive-oriented pace and space, which is, the prevalent style of play, and it's worked really well for the Sixers. That all comes down from Brett. So, I mean, it's really tough to quantify how much he means to this team outside of just the X's and O's on the court. But, overall, obviously, I think he's done an excellent job this season, and I think he's earned, anyone that had him on a short leash, I guess you could say, coming into this year. I don't think you'll find anyone that can make a legitimate case after this year why the Sixers should move on from him as a coach. So I think it'll be really interesting to see, obviously, how this team, first of all, does in the playoffs under Brett during his first, experience as a head coach in the playoff atmosphere. He has tons of experience as an assistant in San Antonio in the playoffs, but none, as the lead guy. And then moving forward in the off season to what they do and where they build on from here. So I think, I'm sorry, this was a long answer, but overall, I think Brett is, he's done a great job, and I think that he's very, central to what this team is building.
Looking at the Sixers heading as they're going into the playoffs, I think we all agree that the final 8 are there. It's just what order they're going to be in is going to vary down the stretch. To me, for the Sixers, I think there are just certain teams they match up very well with, not just because of Embiid, but also because of Simmons, because their style of play. Whether it's the Heat, whether it's the Wizards, I think, and even the Raptors in some ways, I think that these are teams that the Sixers could give a lot of problems. And if I'm the Raptors, if I'm the Wizards, and I'm the Heat, I want nothing to do with the Sixers, because when you get into the playoffs, everything becomes amplified. And even though the Sixers are a young, inexperienced team, I think if they have the right matchup, to me, it's no question that they can win a first-round series.
Absolutely, Josh. They have the talent, and honestly, I think they have the confidence to do it. A lot of people point to their youth and say, they're young, they don't know any better. I don't know if it's that or if they just have this, a kind of calm confidence about them. Ben, Joel, all these guys that you don't really see from a young team. Obviously that's a factor come the playoff games. Matchups, like as you said, is huge. I think it would be, tough to overcome some of those top teams in the East. Obviously, last time I was talking to you, we were talking about the Raptors, the Celtics, the Cavs, as three teams that, just have experience in the postseason that the Sixers don't have, teams that have been, deep into the postseason repeated years. And I think that's something that you can't necessarily quantify. But, in terms of the first round, especially teams that the Sixers would play, I don't think there's any team out of the Pacers, the Wizards, the Heat, the Bucks that the Sixers would, not match up favorably with. Obviously, a lot of it would depend on Joel, especially in a series against, a team like the Wizards, where they have a lot of talent and guys that can kind of bang down low. But obviously, Joel would be central to anything they do. But I think any of those teams, the Sixers not only match up favorably against, but I think they would, feel confident in their ability to, take home a series. And it's pretty crazy how much that, coming into the season, we were talking about the potential of a playoff berth, and now it's just shift to, a lot of us think that they could actually win a series. It's just, it's crazy how fast that's turned.
Is there a team in the playoffs, and let's not include the Cavs because LeBron James is a monster unto himself. Is there a team in the Eastern Conference that you look at, Mike, and say, if the Sixers match up with them, that team really worries me? Because I've heard this answer different from a lot of people. I've heard some analysts say the Raptors. I've heard some people say the Pacers. I feel like the Bucks would be a very difficult matchup for the Sixers in a 7-game series. So is there a team that you look at and say, man, if the Sixers play that team, that really concerns me?
Yeah, Josh, for me, I think it would be the Raptors. Obviously, the Celtics are tough, too, and I think the way they've been playing recently without some of their key guys is, definitely probably worrisome for anyone that would face them. But outside of LeBron, for me, it's this Raptors team that's been, deep into the East Finals 3 years in a row now. They were in the East Finals, the semifinals last year. They had the same core, which I think is really important. That's something, obviously, that the Sixers are trying to do when you have, the same key players and you kind of, build around them. That's usually a good recipe for playoff success. That's something that the Raptors have had. And obviously, Lowry, DeRozan, Ibaka, Valanciunas. They have a well-rounded team, and they're deep. They have one of the best benches all season. They're a tough physical team with that experience. But I just think that, not that the Sixers couldn't beat them. They obviously won in Philly against the Raptors in January. But I just think that the experience and the depth of that Raptors team over a 7-game series, especially if the Sixers were, limited in terms of Joel's ability at all during that series, I think that would be the one that I would really look at. It would be a struggle for the Sixers.
One more before I let you go, Mike, and I always appreciate the time here on 97.3 ESPN. Again, folks, follow Mike on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB for all your Sixers news and updates. My top 3 candidates in no particular order for Coach of the Year are Brett Brown, Eric Spoelstra, and Alvin Gentry. Who are your 3? And I'll preface this by saying, to me, the team with the best record is not automatically the best coach, because a lot of times teams can have great players and not be the coach involved at all.
Yeah, I agree with that, Josh. To be honest, I think my top choice would have to be, and I don't like to admit this, obviously, as someone that covers the Sixers, but I think Brad Stevens has done an excellent job this season with that Celtics team to, have them in position to be competing for the top seed in the East after losing, Gordon Hayward in that manner the first game of the season. And not to mention the turnaround that they dealt with. They only had 4 guys back from a team that went to the East Finals last year. It's, a basically completely remade roster. Brad Stevens has them playing excellent defense. You know, we were talking about they've been competing with, you know, the best teams in the league, even without Kyrie Irving and without Gordon Hayward. So I think, you know, Brad would probably be the top choice if I were to get a vote. Brett would be second in my mind. I'm not sure if that's biased, but to have a Sixers team that won 10 games 2 seasons ago, 28 last year, and to have, you know, similar to the Celtics, a roster that was, you know, very new to each other, playing with each other, to have them on the cusp of a 50-win season and the first season that the team's, you know, really trying to compete after several years of rebuilding, I think is, you know, extremely impressive. So Brett, for me, would be number 2. And number 3, I think you could go a few different places. Spoelstra has done a great job. Obviously, Mike D'Antonio having the Rockets humming like he does would be another choice. So, you know, I think you could go Alvin Gentry also to have the Pelicans in the battle, like you mentioned. But I think Stevens and Brett Brown for me are the top 2 choices.
Well, Brad Stevens' team has 28 road wins this year. That's second in the NBA, only to the Rockets. So, yeah, Stevens definitely deserves a lot of credit up there in Boston. Michael Kaskey-Blomain joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Mike, appreciate the time today and enjoy the Sixers game tonight.
Thanks, Josh. Always great talking to you.